Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you to be here, and also thank you Huy to give us this opportunity to be here this early morning in the holiday, gather together. Before we start, I just want to say a few things about Huy. So first, I want to talk a little bit about his research. So you can say that Huy always work on things before it gets cool, but you can also say that Huy's work is what make something cool and start the trend. So for example, he has worked on Flingbot before class manipulation become like a required demo for all the startups. And then he also started work on language-informed robot learning before large language model is popular. And then recently, he has been starting work on learning for robot hardware design, and I think we should all pay attention to that. I think whenever Huy is starting something new, we should pay attention to it because that's very likely to be a new trend. Okay, and then also a little bit about Huy as a person, as a lab member. I think as one of the earliest lab member, Huy really helped to set up the culture in the lab. And then many of the young students probably know Huy as the person sitting next to the door, the first person that will greet you when you get into the lab, the person who tell you all the lab policy and rules, and also the person demonstrating how to break them. And I think also most importantly, Huy is always the first person that people come to for help when they need anything, like either it's technical difficulties or personal struggles, or just helping you to take your best passport photos. Huy is always there, and then I think we're always very grateful for Huy to set up the very nice lab culture, and I'm sure the lab will feel different if you graduate successfully. But we'll try our best to carry over the culture. And
yes.
And I guess with that, you can start your sister defense.
Wow, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on this Friday morning. Thank you, Sharon, for the kind speech. And special thank you to all my committee members, Yunju, Guanya, Carl, Karen, Sharon. I'm honored to be grilled on robotics by you all later. Today, I want to start by telling you about everything that I've been doing in the last few years. And I'll start maybe a year before my PhD. When I was an undergrad in Sharon's lab, working on a system called Flingbot. So Flingbot unfolded clock using dynamic flinging actions with all these nice tricks for self-supervised learning, safe action parameterization, and sim-to-real transfer. Normally, I tell you about how great Flingbot is, but today I want to dunk on it. Not on Flingbot itself, but the entire way of building robots that it represents. See, it's a perfect example of how robots have traditionally been built. Here, some roboticists picks a task they care about, say, unfolding cloth, but before a single cloth gets unfolded, they have to solve two hard problems. First, the embodiment. What is the best robot for this task? What gripper, what finger, how big the arms are, how the whole workspace is laid out. And second is the behavior. Once you've committed to a robot, how do you teach the task? What data, what learning signal? Each of these decisions require a lot of expertise, or in my case, as an undergrad, a lot of trial and error. And here's my problem with it. One expert does all this work, and what they get out is just one task and one robot in usually one room. And after Flingbot, I became convinced that this just won't scale. There just is not enough expert to cover every task, every robot, in every place that we want robots. And what's actually missing here is data from enough tasks in enough situations, and there's just no way to get that from just a handful of roboticists. So here is my thesis. To get any task on any robot running anywhere, we need to open up robotics to everyone. If we make it easy for people, for anyone to contribute, not just experts, two things happen at once. First, we unlock a whole new level of scale and diversity for real-world robot data, critical for robust and capable robot policies. And second, people become empowered to shape the future of robotics. And this is because robots that come from this move the way that people do tasks that people care about. And these robots would quite literally be shaped by everyone's hands and therefore reflect the people behind them. And that's what I mean by robots from anyone. And for that, the two hard problems have to open up to everyone. First, people need to be able to teach robots new behaviors so intuitively that no expertise is required. That's how we reach towards any task anywhere. And that's the first half of today's talk. And second, people need to also be able to shape the robot's embodiment without being experts either. And this is where we really push the meaning of any robot, to even include robots that don't exist yet. And this will be the second half of the talk. Remarkably, the same simple thing turns out to be the key to opening up both of these problems, handheld gripper. And let me explain by talking about a project called Flingbot. Sorry, Umi on Licks. Still waking up, need more coffee. As the name suggests, Umi on Legs has two parts. The first part, Umi, or Universal Manipulation Interface, is how we scale up robot data without robots. Umi is a handheld gripper with a camera that allows anyone to intuitively collect task demonstrations for any skill, anywhere. And I do mean anywhere. For robot observations, Umi has a GoPro with a fisheye adapter that gives a large visual context. For robot actions, Umi has soft 3D printed fingers, which gives passive compliance and helps increase manipulation robustness. And the system is low cost. Since it's so intuitive to use, you can just give it to anyone and they can start using it. And further, for the price of one UR5E, we can build 100 Umis. And then using Umi, each entire robot demonstration will be contained in a single MP4 file. And then from that file, we can run visual inertial odometry from the RGB and IMU information to give 6-degree of freedom gripper movements. We can also call our tag tracking functions from the video frames to get gripper commands. So from one MP4 file, we get robot observations and then robot actions. And from that data, we can train a policy that takes as input images and proprioception information to produce future gripper movements. So the entire pipeline will look like this. We'll collect a few hundred demonstrations with Umi, all without the robot, as you can see on the left, and then we'll train a diffusion policy and then deploy it on the right. And this pipeline will work even for dynamic tasks like tossing. But there's one caveat. See, the gripper movements require a precise position controller, one capable of tracking robustly even under fast trajectories. And such precise position controllers can be engineered for fixed-based arms, like the UR5. But what about legged robots? So that's where the second part comes in, where we train a manipulation-centric whole-body controller for task tracking without simulating any tasks. So what does this thing do? Well, it should take as input an effector target poses, and then output robot-specific body commands in order to reach those N effector poses. So in the case of my quadruped system, it should output 18 scalars, 3 for each leg, and then 6 for the arm. And so if this is the interface to our whole body controller, you'll notice that it slots right in place into our Umi pipeline to act as the position controller that we need. So what do we actually want out of this whole body controller? Well, to start, the controller should have a formulation that is compatible with Umi, in that it should not depend on any robot-specific body commands like velocity commands, taking as input only N effector targets. They should also track precisely, even for dynamic targets, just like the engineered controllers for fixed-based arms. And then lastly, they should be stable, in that the N effector should be stable regardless of the body movements. This means that the controller should try its best to isolate these body movements from the gripper movements. And the quadruped field actually has a term for this kind of stability. They call it chicken head stability for pretty obvious reasons. So for the rest of the talk, when I say stability, this is what I mean, chicken head stability. So what do PriorWorks do? Well, they typically share the 3 following design choices. First, they take as input robot-specific body commands, like the velocity body command, so that's not Umi compatible. Next, the PriorWorks represent the target as a single target pose, which might work for slow quasi-static tasks, like the ones that PriorWorks have shown. But this is not enough for dynamic tasks, because in order to execute dynamic tasks, legged robots take time to build up the right momentum, just like humans do. So, for instance, in this Boston Dynamics video, notice how Atlas needs to bend down and coil a little bit to the left before tossing to the right. And intuitively, the controller just needs a preview of what motion is coming up in the near future to have this kind of anticipatory behavior. So we might be able to address this by giving it more than just a current target, maybe a trajectory of target poses. And then lastly, the PriorWorks controllers aren't stable. First, they track in the body frame. So this means that the end effector will follow body movements. But since the arms have long links, they typically act to amplify tiny shakes in the body. So notice how with each little step here, a little shake in the body causes a large shake in the arm. But instead, what we want is world frame tracking, controllers that compensate body movements. To really drive this point home of why this is important for policy deployment, let's walk through an example. Imagine that the robot is trying to put the cup down into the saucer, but it's being pulled backwards. What a body frame controller would do is to try to keep its target constant in the body frame. So as the body's pulled back, the end effector follows. This means that the controller will now depend on the much lower rate reacting manipulation policy to perform this correction. Meanwhile, a world frame controller would keep its target constant in the world frame. The gripper stays while the body moves. It would compensate the body movement. So we might want to rethink this body frame formulation. In addition, they only track slow trajectories, which are much easier than fast ones. So this means the controller doesn't really need to learn the necessary body coordination skills to achieve high velocity motion. And then asking it to perform these kind of motions at test time would be out of distribution and then lead to dangerous states. And it turns out that this whole body controller formulation is shared across most prior works. As you can see here, a system from CMU, one from UCSD, and one from MIT. And so to address these, we took out robot-specific body commands, making it UMI compatible. We got precision by giving the controller a trajectory of targets as input, allowing it to anticipate future motion. And then finally, instead of training on slow trajectories in the body frame, we train it with manipulation trajectories recorded from UMI in the world frame, which could include some fast motions like tossing that are task relevant. And what we get out is a manipulation-centric whole body controller. So together, the pipeline looks like this. We'll have images coming into the visual modal policy, which outputs end effector movements. This part is trained using behavior cloning on real-world data. And then the end effector trajectories are then fed into the whole body controller, which is trained using reinforcement learning entirely in simulation. So remember the goal of getting any task, any robot, anywhere? Let's see how the UMI on legs pipeline takes us closer towards this vision. In the behavior cloning stage, we use UMI. This allows the policy to work anywhere thanks to UMI's portability compared to the full robot. And since it's so cheap and easy to use compared to the full robot, this device could be given to anyone to collect data for any task. This makes data collection more scalable. And in addition, this modular design means that once a whole body controller is in place, the same visual modal policy can be ran on many robots, even for challenging dynamic embodiments. How? Well, this manipulation policy, it can be shared for different embodiments because it only assumes that the embodiment has a matching UMI gripper. But it requires a precise and stable position controller. Luckily, we have manipulation-centric whole body controllers, which are easy to train for new embodiments. And the last remaining issue in getting this whole body controller deployed is that we need real-time in the wild odometry. Because to stabilize its end effector, these controllers need to know how their body is moving in space so that they can compensate that movement, stabilizing the end effector. And there are two requirements for this odometry system. First, because the controller runs at 50 hertz, this odometry needs to be real-time. And then it also needs to work in the wild so that our robot can actually go anywhere. However, when we looked at existing systems, we found that many of them used privileged states in the form of Aruko tags. And most outdoor manipulation examples are actually not fully autonomous. So to our surprise, it seems like the lack of in-the-wild real-time odometry has ironically constrained many legged systems in the lab. In contrast, here is the UMI on leg system. No wires, no Aruko tags, running at 1x speed out in the wild, fully autonomous, doing its cup rearrangement task. So how do we do it? Well, we use an iPhone mounted to the butt of the dog, and then we implemented a custom iOS app that publishes the iPhone's pose to the robot at 60 hertz. And because it's tuned very well by Apple, it runs real time and works anywhere. So with this last missing component, we finally get stabilization. Whether it's moving back and forth, side to side, up and down, it just stabilizes. We design experiments to evaluate the capability, robustness, and UMI compatibility of our formulation. Diving into the first one, we ask, is our system capable of really hard skills? Can it do more than just pick and place? So what's a really hard skill? Here is a really hard skill, tossing. It is so challenging that it's only been done once before on quadrupeds by Boston Dynamics. So how did Boston Dynamics pull this off? Well, they typically use offline trajectory optimization in order to find a tossing motion that could toss as far away as possible. And by all means, this is really hard. Getting any tossing behavior in quadrupeds are really hard, but let me compare this to our setting. See, first, our setting is more unstructured. We have to track unseen trajectories coming from a diffusion policy with no explicit assumptions on the object model. So our controller has to track online instead of pre-computing some trajectory offline for known objects. And second, our task has a narrower set of goal states, since we're not just trying to toss as far away as possible, but instead towards a specific target. So we'll go ahead with tossing. We'll collect some demonstrations using UMI in the real world, and then we'll use those trajectories to train our whole body controller in simulation. Okay, it works in simulation. What could possibly go wrong in the real world? Sometimes I still ask myself the same question as I look through weeks and weeks of sim-to-real debugging footage, because whatever we did, the robot would just shake. And this video here is my favorite because not only can you hear the violent vibration when sim-to-real is incorrect, but you'll also be able to see that my lab-mate Zilly is just doing her thing in the back. This goes to show how normal this is during our sim-to-real stage. It's just, oh, it's a violent vibration. And one of the reasons why it took so long was because we found it so hard to diagnose the issue. Whatever went wrong, the robot would just shake. Debugging this took us quite a while. But let me show you what reducing the sim-to-real gap looks like so that next time you can reply to your advisor something more intelligent than saying it's just shaking. So you can tell her, oh, it's because of the pose estimation latency of the odometry. So you do a slow motion smack test to see exactly what that latency is. After we did this, we simulated pose latency during training. Or you can say, oh, it's the joint frictions, they're wrong. So you flip the dog upside down to do some system identification. But by far, my favorite sim-to-real action item was when I realized that the mass matrix in the URDF was wrong. So we disassembled the arm, reweighed each part, and then recomputed the inertia matrix. It was many weeks of this. We found one issue after another. And for all we know, there could still be more. But one day. So since things were kind of working, we had enough confidence to deploy a policy with less regularization. And we stumbled upon a checkpoint that learned this tossing strategy.
Yeah, it leans forward a lot. I keep thinking it will fail. Wow! It's amazing that it doesn't fall.
So it turns out that this whole body motion is not just unique to our system, but to tossing behaviors in legged robots in general. Or as Boston Dynamics put it when describing their tossing system, the throw referred to is not of the object, but of the body of the robot itself. So let's analyze this tossing behavior to see what strategy our policy has discovered. First, you'll notice how the leg bends to build up power to prepare for this first stage, which is a leap and then a toss. And then after the toss, the arms and the legs, they'll curl inwards to coordinate and backwards torque, preventing it from falling forwards. And finally, it will extend its legs to absorb the impact, leading to a soft landing. In contrast, if you use a whole body controller that only observes the current state like prior works do, you get this for tossing. Careful, careful. Oh. The strategy here is a leap and a panic, and then a fall and a land. The upshot here is this. It's using a trajectory interface like we do, allows the whole body controller to anticipate future motion and track more precisely and safely, even for dynamic trajectories. So is our system capable of really hard skills? Thanks to our whole body controller design and sim-to-real efforts, I think so. Moving on to robustness, we wanted to see if our whole body controller can handle unexpected external perturbations. So we've designed this pushing task to test robustness because our controller was trained in simulation with no objects ever resisting its motion. But to help bridge this gap, we've included domain randomization on mass, center of mass, along the body, as well as along the arm and the gripper. It turns out that this was enough to get this task to run. What the policy has learned to perform this task is a strategy I call push and catch. So in the pushing phase, this robot will try and build up more and more power in its body as it fights the static friction of the weight on the ground. So it will keep pushing until this power builds up and the static friction breaks into a dynamic slide, at which point the robot will catch itself. And then this strategy, it will repeat until the robot pushes the kettlebell towards the goal. Quantitatively, we saw a 90% success rate for fully autonomous pushing. And when we tried the 20-pound kettlebell, we noticed that the hardware experiences shutdowns frequently due to overheating and overcurrent. So we switched to a tethered setup with an external power, and then we managed to run 5 trials. The external power is all these noodles that you see in the back. So can our controller handle unexpected external perturbations? Yeah, I think so, thanks to domain randomization, but we probably need better robots with better batteries. And finally, my favorite experiment, UMI compatibility, where we ask, can we plug and play existing UMI policies onto UMI on legs? So for this cup rearrangement task, we're supposed to push the cup to rotate it and then put the cup down onto the saucer. And we took this publicly available checkpoint from the UMI repo, where it was developed entirely separately from our quadruped platform. We put it on our quadruped, and this is what we got. We put our system on a water fountain it's never seen before on campus, on a shaky collapsible table, and then asked it to perform this cup rearrangement task out in the wild, all unseen. We evaluate the system on 4 different cups in 5 different locations on campus and reported a 60% success rate. And comparing this in the wild evaluation with an in-lab evaluation, we noticed a 20% gap. We also compared our iPhone-based odometry with the Oracle odometry and saw that there was another 5% gap between the iPhone-based odometry and the Oracle motion capture-based odometry. But you'll notice that even without perfectly stable odometry, our controller remains pretty stable. As you can see here, how it reacts to perturbations during deployment. So this is the entire pipeline running, UMI outputting actions, and then the controller tracking it. And as it's running, you can come along and just pick up the robot. You can really mess with it, push its leg, come along, smack the gripper, and it will stay stable. Chicken head stable. But if you're going to remember one thing from UMI on legs, I hope it's that we can do this at all. It's that before UMI on legs, nobody has ever been able to reuse the same policy for our fixed-based arm on a quadruped and then run it anywhere. And this is the first step towards any task, any robot, anywhere. We're doing some really hard tests, ones that are really finicky to teleoperate a robot for. And we're using the same policy on unseen robots in unseen environments. That said, that's just the first step, and we've still got some ways to go. Notice here how the exact same UMI checkpoint has different performance between different embodiments. When we dug into it further, we verified it in simulation too. Sadly, not all embodiments are equally UMI-able. For instance, we saw that fixed-based arms like the UR10E matches closely the performance of that of an Oracle embodiment, but the performance is much worse for aerial drones. It has low UMI ability. And one of the reasons why is that during UMI data collection, the human is unconstrained to move. And this means that the demonstrations are usually very multimodal, shown here in the different green arrows. However, during UMI deployment, some of those demonstrations are easier to track than others because the embodiment is constrained. So we asked, what if we guided the policy to output actions that are easier to track for a given embodiment? Let me tell you how we implemented this guidance in a project called UMI on Air. So like before, we're going to take in our observations along with noisy actions to iteratively generate the denoised actions. The actions are then tracked by an embodiment-specific controller. Notice, though, that the controllers usually give a tracking cost, which tells you how well the trajectory can be tracked. You can take the gradient of this cost with respect to the action and then incorporate them into the diffusion process using diffusion guidance. Essentially, the gradient is asking, how could the trajectory be changed to give a lower tracking cost? And then nudge the diffusion samples towards those better trajectories. And this will work for different controllers too. You can just swap out different controllers and embodiments, and then you reuse the same policy. And we call this method embodiment-aware diffusion. This is because even though the UMI policy remains embodiment agnostic, its deployment is now embodiment aware. Because in UMI on legs, it only supported one-way communication from the policy to the controller. UMI on Air closes this loop with two-way communication using diffusion guidance. And in doing so, it makes all embodiments more UMI-able. Here's the plot that you saw from earlier when using normal diffusion policy. When you add the guidance in, it improves the performance for the dynamically challenging drone embodiments a lot. It will even squeeze out a little bit more performance on fixed-based arms, which are already starting from a really high point. And then using this, we managed to get our aerial manipulator to perform long horizon challenging manipulation tasks, like the light bulb insertion task that you see here, all from UMI demonstrations. This is an example of some really hard tasks, ones that would feel impossible to teleoperate the aerial drone for. But what I really want you to remember from this project is how it enabled collaboration. Because if we only make it easier for anyone to collect their data, we'll have many, many small data sets. However, if we make it easier for anyone to collaborate with anyone else, we'll all have one shared data set and we can build a community around it. Let me illustrate. In UMI on Air, our Stanford and CMU team can collaborate from across the country without ever seeing each other. In fact, I just met the first author yesterday. For the peg insertion task, I actually collected all the UMI data here at Stanford. I just spent some time in an afternoon walking around Stanford to collect this data. And then that policy was directly deployed on a drone in CMU in Pittsburgh. The best part is, I still have never seen the robot. I don't even know if I ever will, but maybe that's the point. The magic of the UMI approach is that people can collaborate and contribute. Doesn't matter what skills you have, where you are, whether you even have a robot or not. UMI makes robotics more accessible to everyone. And I think that's why UMI is taking off. To further facilitate collaborations beyond our own lab, I started this initiative called UMI Data, aimed to include all UMI-like datasets. And I've been truly blown away by how many people all around the world has embraced UMI. In 12 months alone, the UMI community dataset has grown by 900,000 demonstrations. For comparison, in the same time frame, the Droid dataset has grown by 0 demos. This stark contrast reveals a core insight. It's that UMI datasets are not static artifacts. They are as dynamic and lively as the community that supports it. I love the Droid dataset, by the way, don't you? So let me take a step back. For the two hard problems that we started with, behaviors and embodiments. The first half of the talk has been about the first one, behavior. The handheld gripper that made teaching robots so intuitive that anyone can collect robot data out in the wild. No robot, no expertise required. We've deployed the resulting UMI policies on legs, on air, and even underwater. This is our policy controlling this drone out in the ocean, a completely unseen environment. And although we can't dive into UMI underwater today, I hope it further convinces you that we've made real progress towards behaviors for any tasks that run on any robot anywhere. However, as we've seen, running on any robot doesn't mean performing optimally on any robot. With embodiment guidance, we've narrowed the gap, but there will always be some difference in performance between different embodiments. Because if you keep trying to make robots smarter with bigger data sets, better algorithms, or more capable policy architectures, but if you think about it, it's the robot's embodiment that enables or constrains what tasks the robot can perform well. For instance, you can collect as much tossing data as you want, but if your robot's embodiment is far from optimal, well, it might toss itself too. So this brings us to the second half of today's talk. Here, we also need to open up the second hard problem to everyone. We want to make sure that anyone could generate robot embodiments for tasks that they care about without being experts. So let's frame this problem more concretely. Given as input a target and effector motion from some task demonstration and some reward function, our goal is to generate complete robot embodiments for the task that achieves high reward. And here by complete, I mean everything including geometry, kinematics, inertial properties, as well as how it moves with a controller. We call this problem motion-conditioned robot co-design. And for the second half of today's talk, I want to tell you about our attempt at tackling this problem in one unified framework called transformer-transformer. It has 3 parts, and you have until part 2 to figure out the pun in the name yourself. So with that, let's dive into part 1, a unified robot representation. Now, if we want a model to co-design any robot, the network needs a common language that spans across diverse robots' embodiments. So we create robot tokens, a unified robot representation. We call it unified because we've designed it to tokenize any robot, giving tokens that can be used as inputs or outputs from the model. So given a robot like this quadruped manipulator, we parse all of its embodiment attributes into a few token types, including links, joints, and motors. We also include the robot state from the motor, links, joints, as well as the actions. So we have robot embodiment tokens and then robot dynamic tokens. This means that robot token is complete. It includes all the information about a robot's embodiments and dynamics. Robot token is also flexible. It can handle arbitrary degrees of freedom and connectivity using token IDs. Here, the tokens use IDs to point to each other so that joints, for instance, know which two links they connect. And then robot token is also consistent. The tokenizer does a lot of pre-processing to reduce all this redundancy by storing inertial and transform data in a consistent frame. And the upshot of all this is that our tokenizer can turn any robot into a sequence of embodiment and dynamic tokens, whether it's a biped with complex linkages, a dexterous hand, or even a full-blown humanoid. Now the question is, what can we do with these tokens? And that brings us to part 2, a unified architecture called transformer-transformer. We call it unified because, as you'll see, one model has different functionalities. And as for the pun, the first transformer refers to robots whose embodiments can change, while the second refers to the self-attention architecture. More technically, the model is a diffusion transformer. It's trained on robot tokens. Since it's a diffusion model, noise is added to all input tokens except for the conditioning token. And for each token, we'll add in that token's ID embeddings before passing it through the model to predict the denoise tokens. Now here's the key insight. You can train this model with different masking schemes to get different functionalities. This means that one transformer can wear many different hats. So for instance, it can act as an unconditional generator of robot embodiments. Here, the conditioning input is nothing, which means that the diffusion model starts off from random Gaussian noise with no conditioning information. And the output are complete robot embodiments in their states. Visually, it looks like this. Starting from random Gaussian noise, you'll iteratively run the model to denoise the tokens until you get a denoise robot. And since this whole process is stochastic, if you run it again, you'll get different robots each time if you train on different robots. Here, we tried training on different robots from Mujoka Menagerie, and then found that in a single transformer, you can diffuse out diverse robots, from fixed-based arms to quadrupeds to humanoids to dexterous hands. I bet you never saw a diffusion process on robots before, right? Our model can also wear other hats. It's also a cross-embodiment controller. It takes as input the target trajectory and the current robot states to diffuse out robot actions. We call this control policy embodiment aware because it is given the complete embodiment information. This means that when you run in the policy on a robot with, like, say, different inertia, a smaller joint range, or different motor gains, the policy will be able to adjust its control strategy accordingly because it is conditioned on the complete robot embodiment. And this is why when you run it on different quadrupeds with different knee directions or different torso length, it will just adjust its control strategy accordingly. So with all of these different functionalities under one model, we can now go back to the first question and ask, what is the best robot embodiment for a given manipulation task? Another way of phrasing this question is, conditioned on the manipulation task, could we generate robot embodiments that achieve high reward? This brings us to the third part of transformer-transformer, dynamics self-guidance, a unified dynamics training objective. And here we call the training objective unified because it prepares the model to zero-shot optimize unseen rewards at inference time. Let's see how. Given as input a target motion trajectory and some reward function to optimize, the model must output an optimized embodiment. The key challenge here is how can we generate high reward embodiments, especially since our model was never trained on any rewards. Here's the trick. We can use the input reward function to turn the model's own embodiment and dynamics predictions into a pseudo reward prediction. And with this reward prediction, we can simply ask the model to generate a lot of robots in parallel, rank them with the predicted reward, and then return the best one. And then this works because we're essentially doing best of n random sampling. Imagine that this is the slice of the optimization landscape. And as long as we sample enough and then return the best one, we're likely to get pretty good candidates. But could we do better? What if we take the gradient of the optimization landscape to nudge the samples towards higher rewards? So at each diffusion time step, the intermediate noisy tokens are a function of the embodiment tokens. This means that the reward is also a function of the embodiment tokens. So we can take the gradient of them and then incorporate it back into the diffusion process, also using diffusion guidance like in UMI on air. With this gradient, we're asking the model to consider how to change the robot to increase the reward. And since the network uses its own dynamics predictions to steer itself, we call this procedure dynamics self-guidance. When we train the model for this, we actually use a long context with time steps into the future. This forces the model to learn long-range dependencies between robot embodiments and robot dynamics over extended time horizons, which ultimately leads to better reward predictions. So, does it work? Let's start again with this tossing task, where this randomly generated quadruped would fall over. When we asked our model to generate a robot for this task, it combined many different tricks to make the robot more stable for this dynamic motion, such as by lowering the center of mass and increasing the support polygon. And it did all of this as a result of trying to maximize the tracking reward, which, again, it has never seen during training. And for the same trajectory, we can also ask the model to optimize more reward terms, such as also minimizing the torque. And this made the robot smaller and therefore lighter, while still being able to do the task. And the result of adding this extra term in reduced the average torque usage by 32%. See, by adding another reward term in, we're changing the optimization landscape. This also changed the best robot for the task, because now the model must balance between making these two trade-offs, sacrificing maybe a little bit of tracking performance to use a little bit less torque. And the model is able to make this trade-off, demonstrating that you're able to train on embodiment dynamics modeling to optimize for unseen rewards. In other words, the model can zero-shot optimize rewards. So changing the reward changes the landscape. But changing out the target motion also changes the landscape. Here, when we conditioned on different trajectories, we indeed see that the model produces different robots, each specialized for a single motion that it was conditioned on. But wait, let's take a step back. We actually don't want to optimize robots for just one motion. We actually want to optimize the robots for manipulation tasks, that are much better captured by a distribution of motions. So how could we do this? And it turns out that we can directly tackle this by composing diffusion models. At the high level, if we have one model optimizing for tossing and another optimizing for chopping, we could get a model optimized for both tossing and chopping by adding the diffusion predictions together. So to test this, we took the bimanual dishwashing UMI dataset and fed 26 validation trajectories into transformer. The model then generates robots that are optimized for all the trajectories that we gave it, helping us navigate the large design space of both discrete choices like different spine designs, as well as continuous choices like arm dimensions. And after generation, the same model can be used as the cross-embodiment controller used to validate the generated robots. So essentially, a dataset of manipulation trajectories coming in, complete robot embodiments and actions out. This demonstrates that we can zero-shot optimize for a manipulation dataset with multi-trajectory optimization. Moving on to some quantitative results. Here's the random baseline, which of course does really poorly. We also have a CMAES baseline in orange. This is an evolutionary baseline. So as we give it more compute, of course, it performs better. Now here's transformer in blue. You'll notice how you get even better performance than CMAES while taking much less time. Even when our model uses 128 samples, it finishes in less than a second. So why is our formulation so much faster? There are two reasons. The first reason has to do with using GPUs instead of CPUs, which can efficiently parallelize over the number of samples. But the second has to do with our network architecture. So typically, dynamics model, as well including analytical dynamics model, are sequential models, predicting one step at a time. In contrast, we have a diffusion architecture that is non-overaggressive along the time dimension. So performance along an entire episode is evaluated in parallel as opposed to sequentially. Now up next, using dynamic self-guidance. In green, we found that using this gradient information was useful to squeeze out a little bit of extra performance. However, using dynamics guidance also means that the model now must perform both the forward and the backward passes. And this, although this doubles the optimization walk clock time, we still found that it was 4 to 16 times faster than CMAES. Now these trends held across many different rewards, all unseen, a lot of different use cases, tasks, as well as design spaces. But amongst all of them, I want to point to one particular result, one for multi-trajectory optimization in the bimanual mobile design space. To optimize these robots for the 26 dishwashing demonstrations simultaneously, our model ran 3 hours faster than the CMAES baseline. And to achieve this performance, it reasoned by itself for up to 60 seconds, using more inference time compute to get better designs. The upshot here is that Transformer can generate better robots when allowed to search over more inference seeds, demonstrating test time scaling. Finally, we want to stress test the system to see if its optimized designs can be fabricated with real hardware. Remember the cloth unfolding task that I opened the talk with? Here it is again. We'll use it for our real-world experiments. The task here is not just challenging because it involves dynamic high-velocity flings, but also because it demands robustness to mismatch physics, from cloth friction to aerodynamic drag. And when we tested this task with the original Aloha design, we found that even with a lot of effort, it struggled to track this trajectory. In contrast, when we asked Transformer to optimize the design, it came up with this design. Notice how the arm's link length is actually longer than the original. It's long enough to kinematically reach all the targets along the flinging motion, but still lightweight enough to be supported by the small motors on the arm. It also mounted the arm upside down, which enabled this more energy-efficient underarm swing as opposed to an overhead fling. These design choices enabled good tracking over the entire trajectory, leading to an fully unfolded cloth at the end. And quantitatively, we saw a 73% reduction in tracking position error, along with a 30% reduction in maximum joint speed. These results demonstrate that our optimized designs are manufacturable and their gains robustly transfer to real hardware. So altogether, Transformer rethinks robot co-design for manipulation as a 3-part process. It starts with demonstrations of how the N effector should move. Then these motions are then optimized by our model to maximize the reward, and it will explore a large design space with reward-guided diffusion. This process generates complete robots, which it can then self-validate by directly controlling them. This model handles all these low-level technical details in the robot hardware and control so that people can just give it motions for any task that they care about. This is how we take a step closer to anyone being able to generate robot embodiments for tasks that they care about. So we started off with a way of building robots that yielded one robot in one task in one room. Today, I've argued for this to scale to any task, any robot running anywhere, we'd need to open up robotics to everyone, because that allows us to achieve scale and diversity in real-world robot data. This is the perspective that my research has brought me to, but actually not where I started. Because when you ask how should we scale robot data, maybe one of the first thoughts is, oh, the robot should just collect data by itself. This was the pathway that I explored when I first started in this field. And the thing that didn't scale here is that the system remains pretty task-specific, from their action parameterization to their task reward design. So I looked for another way. Another way to scale robot data is to make use of all the existing robot data, like images and text. And this led me to investigate robots that learn from foundation models. And although these models were really good at generalization in images and text space, they just couldn't handle low-level robot actions by themselves. This brought me finally to the UMI line of work for learning from human demonstrations. And as of now, I think there's a lot of progress being made in this third pathway. But looking forward, I actually think that the technical pathway for robotics may trace back my own path, but in reverse order. Learning from human demonstrations seems necessary for learning the low-level robot actions. But to perform higher-level reasoning and coordination, we might need to merge them with foundation models somehow. And this takes us towards robots that can act autonomously by themselves for longer and longer, towards a point where they start collecting more data by themselves than what we put in. In this sense, all these directions that have been explored actually complement each other in the long run. So yes, although the robot should collect data by itself, I think that we might need human demonstrations still to get there. That's the technical roadmap to achieve scale and diversity. But there's the second point regarding empowerment that I now want to expand upon. See, over the course of my PhD, there was also another transformation taking place. AI is changing how we work, how we live, talk, and even think. And there's this common feeling that this change is happening elsewhere, that we are, for the most part, passive observers of this technology that's going to change our lives. But current day AI is only digital. And I think robotics is going to be an even bigger transformation because it takes place here, out in the world. What we give these robots, from their design to their behaviors, to their goals and values, will have huge consequences across bits and atoms. Choices that no single entity could or should make alone. Most roboticists today are still focused on making robots more capable and general, with greater scale and diversity in their data. But moving forward, I increasingly believe that we'll have to think just as hard about how we empower the rest of the world to take an active role in steering what we build. I've talked to so many people over the years about UMI. I've shown them the system, I've taught them how to use it, and I've seen the moment when things click, when they realize that this thing that they hold in their hand could change a robot. And that's what I mean by empowerment. So the work I've presented today is a first step towards making it easier for people to teach and design robots. But what I hope is that if people feel like they could literally shape a robot's behaviors and embodiments with their own hands, that they will also feel like they could shape where robotics is going with their own hands. It's the best time yet to be a roboticist, and I hope you all join me. With that, I'd like to end my talk. Yeah, thank you. Before I open up for questions, though, I think it's customary to do the acknowledgement sections. Now,
after the questions, you want to...
Maybe I can do it now?
Okay.
Yeah.
The chair is Yunju.
Yes. Thank you. Okay.
No, he is a Columbia student. So that's why Yunju is
Thank you, Yunju. We'll go on to the acknowledgements. So I want to start by thanking all of my collaborators. I've learned so much from working with all of you, and I hope you all had as much fun working with me as I did with all of you. And a special shout out to my mentees, who I'm so proud of. Each and every one of them has continued to do research in AI and robotics after working with me, and I can't wait to see what you all go on to do. And of all the people that I've worked with during my PhD, though, there's one who matters the most, someone who deserves her own slide. In 2019, I became interested in robotics and AI. So after taking Sharan's course, I decided that I really wanted to do research in her lab. So I wrote her a few sentences asking her. Over the last 7 years, I've been fortunate to be mentored by one of the most brilliant, creative, kind, optimistic people I've ever met. I've got to see her blossom in her professorship, mentor and graduate her first PhD students, and grow her lab from Columbia to Stanford, from my undergrad all the way through my PhD. Through it all, she has held the highest standard as a scientist in work and in life. And she somehow still managed to be one of the most fun people to be around. But there's a lot to unpack here. But what I admire most about Sharan is how much she cares for her students. See, that's why I think year after year, one of the most stressful deadlines in the lab is Sharan's birthday. Over the years, her students have made her drawings. We've made her clay figures, jigsaw puzzles. Last year, we even made a children's book from scratch. All this is to say, we care a lot about you too, and we appreciate everything that you do for us. That brings us to the next group, my lab mates. You all know how you are some of my closest friends now, so I don't just want to make some hand-wavy qualitative statements. I want to ground it on some hard, quantifiable statistics. Over the years, we've eaten lunch together basically every single day. That amounts to at least 1,000 lunches based on Claude's estimate. Probably more meals than I've shared with any group of people outside of my family. That daily bonding moment is so special that it seems like some of us never want to miss it. We've made it a tradition to go out of our ways to celebrate everyone's birthday, one of the cutest acts of kindness we do for each other. We've gone on so many ski trips, with hopefully many more to come. We've thrown really fun barbecues, picnics, drinking parties, wholesome hot
Two,
moments.
1.
And also Christmas parties where we play video games and make tree decorations together.
1.
We've traveled across the country and around the world for conferences. You've made my PhD so fun, and you're the reason why I come into lab every day. And my family, I know they try their best to listen to me yap about research, and I'm pleased to announce that my parents finally know I don't just do IT in my computer science PhD. I want to thank my parents for giving me a truly magical childhood, one filled with play, curiosity, and unconditional love. A childhood where I always felt safe, encouraged, and free to dream. And also want to thank my parents for then completely destroying all of that by leaving me home with my sister, who gave me such a rough time that now she takes credit for all the grit and persistence that carried me through the PhD. She's on Zoom right now. She'll probably remember this for years. And I want to thank my friends from throughout my life, whether you're on Zoom or in this room right now. My friends all the way back from kindergarten, all through middle school. I don't know anyone else who still has their kindergarten friends in their life, so I'm really lucky. My friends from high school, who are all there in the moment where I found my passion and then started throwing myself into them. My friends from college, who stayed up so many nights doing problem sets with me as my dream of becoming a robotics researcher crystallized. And a special shout out to Anna, Ame, and Ian. When we met in freshman year, I never imagined we'd be here. Still best friends, and all of us doctors or on track to becoming one, hopefully. Not to flex, but I think we're a pretty cracked friend group. And then all the people I met during my PhD, from fellow grad students to the Vietnamese community at Stanford, to even my dog park friends. You've supported me and my research more than you know. Finally, I want to end where everything started. I want to spend the last minute today on the longest running reinforcement learning agent I've ever trained. I want to spend the last minute thanking Mo. 13 years ago, I made one of the most important decisions in my life. It's the decision that turned dog training and reinforcement learning into my passion. It's what first made me wonder whether I could teach robots and AI the same way. Everything that you've seen today traces back to that day when Mo first came into my life. But Mo gave me so much more than just a research direction. Taught me routine, discipline, because he spent countless days and nights in the lab right beside me. Every mistake I've made raising him means that Oliver, from day one, has had a better dog dad than Mo ever did. Mo has traveled the world with me. He's moved from Vietnam to New York, then again to California. He was there for middle school, high school, college, and then this PhD. He can't be here on the day that I finish it. I want you all to know that without him, I would not be standing here today. So, this one's for Mo. Thank you. Now I think I'll have to invite a brave soul to break that by asking a technical question. Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
In Transformers, you mentioned that there's like a separate network that is estimating the rewards, right? To train that network, like what kind of data, how much data did you actually need? Did you need to plug in every single embodiment into like a training loop just to arrive at the final reward?
Yeah, great question. So it's actually the exact same reward. The idea is that this one model is both this dynamics model, this hardware generator, this cross-embodiment controller, and it does all this as a result of trying to model the entire sequence of both embodiment information as well as how that embodiment moves, so the states of the embodiment. So when you write down rewards as a function of the robot state or robot action, anything regarding the robot's behavior in the state, that can just be a function off of the network's output. So effectively, the dynamics model can be turned zero-shot into a rewards model.
But the data that you use to actually, train the reward model itself, or like the data set of like, okay, this embodiment has achieved this reward on this task
Yep.
is policy dependent, but your network is also outputting the trajectories as well, right?
Yes.
So
Yes. And then
the trajectory itself can be plugged into whatever reward function you care about.
Yes.
Produce.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Question.
I have a few clarification questions. Thanks for the great talk. First one is a somewhat of a follow-up. In order to train your transformer model, it looked like you had to have stated actions
Mhm.
per embodiment. So does that mean you had to train a controller per embodiment and then use that? Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
So specifically, our network can be trained on just any data set that includes embodiment, states, and actions. Whether those actions came from a differentiable IK controller like Mink or a RL controller, it doesn't matter. In fact, we have both in our data set. Yep.
And then for the second project, when you were using the task cost to produce a gradient to improve upon your trajectory, does that mean you rolled the diffusion out a little bit, or you predicted x0 and then you had a tracker, like in simulation, track that, produce a cost, update it, and then go back and forth like that?
Yeah.
And then after that, you track the entire thing, or was that done like blind?
Yeah, great question. Everything is done in the network. This is one of the reasons why it ran so fast, because everything from its internal like controller policy to the embodiment diffusion process to the dynamics part, it's all happening as a diffusion process. And that's why it runs on the GPU without ever being bottlenecked by any CPU GPU communication. And this is also one of the reasons why CMAES is so slow. It has to have the simulation in the loop. It has to run it sequentially, whereas ours just diffuse out. Yep.
One question on this.
Yes.
You can help me.
What was it, me? Okay. Hello. Thanks for the great presentation. One question I had was, it seems like a really big concept that you've introduced a lot is having end effector poses or trajectory as like what the main high level, low level policy interface would look like. Do you think that is optimal, or do you think there could be something better?
Yeah, this is a great question because it gets at one of the key trade-offs that my work makes. Manipulation, I would say that at the most grounded level, it's applying the right forces onto objects around the world. Poses is just not forces. And I think that a much more complete kind of interface would also include some measurement of force or tactile. The unfortunate thing right now is that force and tactile sensors are just not the same level of cost, ubiquity, robustness as cameras are. And so when you add in, you can add force and tactile into UMI rigs, but the unfortunate thing is that it still requires a lot of technical skills to integrate them and to get them up and running. In some sense, it makes the entire data collection rig less accessible to people. And so less people can actually contribute to robotics.
Very interesting insight. Thanks.
What is your best estimate of the thing that finally made this into real stuff and jittering? Or just like everything, all the improvements?
Yeah, it's kind of like everything, but one of the last things that we did find before we started seeing some like basic signs of life was that arm inertia. It was just something that like you don't like. At least I'm not in the habit of questioning. The manufacturer of the robot gives you a UREF and you assume that it's correct, but you know it's not. Yeah, and so before that, that was the violent vibrations that you heard with Zoe in the background.
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess following up on that, what's the assumed real gap from in wild experiments in robotics versus indoor experiments? The locomotion policy observes pulse trajectories.
Mhm.
Seems like the gap is not that big. When the reason also
Yeah, I think that it was a matter of we only decided to do in the wild experiments after we've already finished everything, and so we never trained the whole body controller on like randomized terrain. It was only trained on flat terrain, and so when deployed at test time outside with soft terrain, unstable terrain, it was out of distribution to controller. But I think that if you train it with like enough diverse terrain, I think it could work. It could close the gap significantly.
So the end effect is that the future policy produces is around the same time.
Yes. Yeah. That's like control for. That's the gap that you saw. Yuhai?
Yeah, I really had a great time working with you on Wing Legs. You're learn a lot not only about your technical skills, but more about like your passion toward research and your resilience of like all the failures we had together. So actually, I have a follow-up question. Like nowadays, the coding agents or like reasoning models are so good. Maybe they can already solve like most of the bugs we have, like the transform bug and all those kind of very classical issues. But I'm curious, like, what do you think is the most important property for nowadays, like, to become a good robotics researcher or engineer under this context?
Yeah, that's a really hard question that I think a lot of people are actively thinking about right now. I think that the common answer I've heard from people is that, these AI models are so capable, they're gonna keep doing more and more of what you do. So it's not about what you do, right? And so some people have started to say, oh, maybe it's because maybe your goal as a researcher or as a student is to teach yourself, to learn, to understand. And that will never go away. But I thought more about this and I realized that what I really hope like, future generations of not just roboticists, but also students take in is that you have a level of optimism about the future. You should understand where everything is and what's wrong with current day like approaches in robotics as well as what's wrong with the world right now. But understanding that, yet still maintaining a level of optimism that we can do something about it is probably what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. So if there's no more questions, we can move on to the closed door session. Thank you all.